The untold truth of the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden is one of the most famous places in the Bible, a peaceful oasis in the garden that God created as a home for Adam and Eve before they made the stupid mistake and were expelled. Here's the untold truth of the Garden of Eden, the main appearance of the Garden of Eden in the regular book, the book of Genesis in the Holy Bible of the Old Testament, of course, in the book of Genesis, the beginning in chapter 2. Verse 8 says, "And the Lord God set a garden in Eden in the east, and there he put in the man whom he had formed." The Garden of Eden, according to what has been written and said, was a place where God built a house for the first humans, filled with all kinds of plants and animals, including the famous tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which Adam and Eve were specifically empowered not to eat of its fruits. However, the protoplasts, the first that were created by God, as it was well known, went ahead and did it. God immediately expelled them from the garden, leaving behind a series of angels who would ensure the return of sinners so that they would not have access to the tree of life again. Adam and Eve were then forced to come to terms with the idea that they had to work to make a living, to have children in pain, where one of them invented and implemented the idea that he could kill his brother, as he discovered in practice, if he did not already know that they were mortal and that with one weapon he could take his own life. But what was the exact agreement that the protoplasts had to abide by? Why should not they eat from the fruits? What was the snake that punished Adam and Eve to disobey the agreement? Well, the popular modern interpretation usually teaches that the snake is actually the devil in disguise. In reality, however, according to biblical archaeology, when the book of Genesis was written, the idea of the devil had not yet been invented. The idea of the powerful supernatural force opposing God did not develop until a few hundred years after Genesis. According to Genesis 3:24, when God led Adam and Eve out of Eden, he placed cherubim and a sparkling sword at the east entrance to prevent humans from re-entering the garden. On the other hand, according to the Jewish Encyclopedia, for scholars behind the Jewish theological writing known as the Talmud and the inner school of Jewish mysticism known as Kabbalah, there are actually two gardens of Eden. One of them is the earthly garden in which Adam and Eve lived and ate fruit and enjoyed life or whatever. The other garden is a heavenly paradise where the immortal souls of the righteous live. These two concepts are distinguished by reference to a lower and higher Garden of Eden, or by calling the earthly place as Gan, garden, and the heavenly place as Eden. As the Hebrew Encyclopedia explains, various ecclesiastical writings describe Eden as a place for the righteous who suffer innocence, who do good deeds, and walk without charge before God. Those who live in heavenly Eden wear clothes made of light and will enjoy the immortality that comes from the tree of life. The ungodly will be punished sevenfold, while the righteous will enjoy sevenfold happiness, living in mansions and walking with God who guides them. A strange question that arises is, if Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden, that is, in the heavenly realm of paradise, then how did they find themselves outside a garden on earth? Another question that has been asked and discussed for centuries is the location of the natural Garden of Eden on earth. After all, if you knew there was a place with talking animals, a flaming swinging sword, and a tree that could make you live forever, you would love to find it. Estimates based on the description given are many, but generally place the garden somewhere from the Persian Gulf and Armenia to Samaria and India. Even in Missouri, USA, as many people have their own ideas about where the Garden of Eden may actually have been. As for what was the exact commitment that the protoplasts had to keep and the reason they should not eat from the fruits, but also who or what was a snake that spoke and lived in the place created by God, we will see in the next post. So this is translated for you for a Greek article. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Finally, support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.